And first of all, I'm going to ask Donatella to speak to us. Donatella is currently a consultant for the Performing Arts, the Ministry of Culture in Italy. She's previously worked at the Italian Theatre Board, overseeing the international promotion of live entertainment and the development of professional artistic exchanges. Delighted to have Donatella with us today. And you're going to give us an overview of the Italian scene. So I'm going to switch off my mic and hand over to you, Donatella.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Donatella Ferrante, and I work with the General Direction for Performing Arts. I am white, I'm over 60, my hair is light brown, and I have brown eyes. I'm wearing a dark jumper, a black jumper, and I'm wearing a scarf. With flowers, with a flower pattern. I will tell you about the institutional mechanisms of dance in Italy. Contemporary dance in Italy started in the 70s, 1970s, but especially developed in the 1980s when the new Italian dance became the expression of the work of a number of young authors and groups that did not belong to the traditional institutions, just to say, in the classic dance or opera or theater, and who developed their own artistic language. In those years, dance was recognized as such within a general approach to innovate the artistic scenario in Italy. From an institutional and administrative point of view, it was first in the 90s that dance in Italy settled down in a way as a separate sector vis-a-vis ballet and other sectors with its own standing rules. So at the end of that decade, dance companies were specifically recognized. And although based on rules and systems which are similar to those of other sectors, such as theater and music, funding for dance in Italy has historically been, in any case, by far lower than that of music and the theater. So the situation that was typical in Italy for contemporary dance until recently was that of a sort of marginal sector vis-a-vis music and theater and the opera, in a sector where we also had a lack for contemporary dance venues whereby traditional theaters are normally used or were normally used for contemporary dance. It was back in the 90s. And it was at the time that contemporary dance performances were already present in the programs of various festivals, also devoted to research and the new innovative language. And that was the start of a number of networks that were set up to promote the work of young choreographers. And the system became more lively, and that was increasingly appreciated both abroad and in Italy. It was within this context that starting in 2015, the ministry introduced a number of elements for change. And this, of course, had repercussions in terms of funding and also of rules. I would like to mention a few of these changes. First and foremost, it was recognized that many companies do not only stick to one choreographer only, but a multitude of them. And so they are defined bodies for the promotion and production of dance. And this was one element. We also have started supporting the propulsive function of dance as an open language in contemporary communities, which is open to other disciplines such as theater or circus and other sectors. And then the dance system is organized in a system which goes beyond production companies. So production centers were set up, centers of significant interest for dance were set up, and also national choreographic centers. Their number is 5, 2, and 1, the 3 types of centers that I mentioned. In addition to that, the ministry recognizes the capability of dance also to operate in non-conventional spaces with a multitude of formats. The ministry also supports the vocation for international mobility in dance. This exchange with international experiences entailed a number of initiatives and experiments, including the new platform for Italian dance and several projects in favor of artistic mobility abroad. And Open Dialogo is actually one of the initiatives. In 2022, national funding for dance equaled 4.3% of the overall amount of money allocated to live entertainment. At the end of 2022, we started a pilot project until 2024, whereby we want to meet a number of very ambitious goals, which is promoting and supporting concrete and practical forms of accessibility for disabled artists in order to empower people and the rights of people with disabilities, in order to enhance a new awareness of the issue of disability on the part of operators and audiences, in order to grow professional skills and enrich our cultural activity. You see, in Italy, social and inclusive dance and theater is practiced all over the country, and it is highly diversified in terms of practices. It's a whole universe of experiences. Some of them are very impactful, and their quality goes beyond, of course, the social aspect. There is one so-called single fund for the performing arts in Italy. And you see, theater and dance have been financed as projects for social cohesion and inclusion. But the project that I was talking about is totally new, because for the first time ever in Italy, we finance in a direct way the participation of disabled artists, but not within the framework of social inclusion. Rather, it is focused on the enhancement of professionalism in dance. And so this, of course, follows what has been done in the past, but of course, the overall approach is improved and consolidated. Indeed, this project that I'm mentioning, is a project that funds and finances networks in order to facilitate performing arts for disabled performers and artists, so that they become co-protagonists of the entire sector. This is a principle which is accompanied by another principle, which is the fact that we have networks of professional organizations behind the project. All this stems from a long process whereby we have had a very important participation on the part and contribution on the part of Oriente Occidente, Europe Beyond Access, and Presenti Accessibili, the event in Milan, which was organized by the Aldiqua organization, by Region Lombardy, and the Ministry for Culture. So this was the origin, and the idea was that of giving a practical answer. We have 25,000 euros available for each project, which is the outcome of a number of initiatives that can benefit from the existence of a network of solidarity-based professionalism, if I may say so, so that we have an integrated approach, and so much so that disabled artists actually can really be protagonists from the first steps of a project all the way down the chain to the performing moment before the audience. So we have 10 projects so far, and 5 of them pertain to dance, which is fundamental, which means that dance and disability in Italy were absolutely mature and had already projects that could be put forward. So out of 10 projects that have been allocated the amount of money I said 5 focus on dance. This is very significant. I would like to reiterate it. So you see, Open Dialogo is in line with a direction which has been decisively taken by our directorate, by the ministry. It is a very ambitious goal. Of course, it is only the first step, but as often said by Aldiqua and its protagonist, the first step is always the most important one. We need to start. Thank you.
Fantastic. What an exciting moment in your journey that we had this opportunity to find out more. It sounds as though it's been a fantastic route to get to where you are, and we're going to find out from Aristide how it is on the ground. What's it like for disabled dancers in Italy? So Aristide is a freelance dance artist with disability and a community dance practitioner, and together with other artists with disabilities, he founded Al di Acqua Artists, a group advocating for the rights of artists with disability in the arts sector. And artists with disability is the chosen terminology that they use within Italy to describe what we in the UK would describe as disabled artists. So over to Aristide to find out a bit more from your perspective of this rapidly changing landscape that you find yourself in.
Thank you very much, Jo, for giving me the floor, and welcome everybody. I'm very happy to be here. My name is Aristide. I'm a he. I'm a man in my 40s. I have dark brown hair, very short hair, thinning out now. I have brown eyes. I wear glasses that are quite large, thick-lensed, and I have a mustache. My right arm is shorter than my left arm. I'm wearing a blue polo shirt with 4 buttons. I'm in my living room, and behind me there is a wall with 2 portraits. I'm a performer, I'm a choreographer, and I'm a practitioner of dance in community context. I'm a member of Aldiqua Artists, the first Italian association of workers with disabilities in the entertainment industry that promotes the independence and rights of people with disabilities, both as professionals working in the Italian system of performing arts and also as an audience enjoying artistic works. Aldiqua Artists started during the lockdown period in 2020, also thanks to the Europe Beyond Access project. The current members of Aldiqua Artists are mostly dance artists who already work in the sector, both in Italy and abroad, before the establishment of the organization. Our careers have developed in the context of Italian contemporary dance, especially, probably because the cultural perspective is characterized by the values of innovation, experimentation, the mingling of languages, and in part it is also enhanced by entities who are inclined to question what is normal, and people who wonder what dance is and what dance can contribute to culture in general. It is within this specific landscape belonging to the broader scenario of Italian dance that we found allies, opportunities that have supported our careers as performers and then as choreographers and as authors. I would like now to go back to the past, if I may. You see, my first encounter with art and artistic practice dates back to more than 20 years ago, and it was with the theatre. In the city where I live, there was and there still is actually a very lively theatre workshop for people with and without disability. When aged 14, I had a vague desire, to say, to encounter artistic practice, and I got in touch with this domain, with this space. I was invited to attend, to participate. I found access to dance, and that way. I was barely a teenager, and crossing the threshold of a dance school was a thought that was really alien to me. It was unimaginable. I had never heard stories about people with disabilities who dance. There were no dancers with disabilities in theaters or TV. There were no openings, so to say. I had really the feeling that my body was not suitable for dance. And that idea prevented me from even thinking of being a dancer. Then the desire to dance has silently grown over the years within this space, which was a sort of laboratory where often the body was at the center of the practices that we made. So when aged 19, thanks to these artistic acquaintances and work and contacts, and also thanks to the contribution coming from friends, and also to the recognition of my artistic potential by people working in the sector, I decided that I would enter a dance school in my city, and that I would attend courses. I often wondered about the characteristics of that first context that helped me become confident enough to start an artistic career. So you see, for me, it was essential that disability was not a taboo, that there were people with disabilities, that the purpose of the workshop was artistic and not therapeutic or simply an animation. And disability was present in different forms. That was very important. What was actually questioned were not our bodies or our minds, but our theatrical practices, our communicative practices that the teachers had in turn inherited, and that were based on one model of body and mind together. So these were questioned, and this interrupted a sort of passing down in a non-critical way of the system. So I have told you about the origins because this makes it possible also to reflect on the present time and on the current transformations, because there are a number of elements that I'm very happy about and that come to the fore. First and foremost, the issue of disability in the performing arts sector is less and less a taboo. It is addressed as a topic, as is the case here today, and the voices of artists who experience disability and work in the field are considered central and necessary contributions to enact change. And there is a dynamic which is increasingly horizontal and which welcomes our perspective. Another element of change is the need to introduce people with disabilities in a professional and vocational perspective within the system without marginalizing them. In my case, the theatre workshop, which was a community experience that I had, so it was crucial for me, as I explained, and yet it was only the start of a career that then entailed that I went into training and education, worked with professionals, and I made a training experience. Another element of a change, which is important, I think, is the recognition by the various actors of the sector of the fact that the sector itself needs to change radically and also in operational terms so that it can be inhabited and used and experienced by professionals with disabilities and by audiences with disabilities. This recognition, as Donatella said, often translates into the taking of responsibility to start projects and actions. We witness proliferation of seminars and actions for the empowerment of artists with disabilities and the activation of processes related to accessibility in terms of communication, the works themselves, and the spaces that are used by audiences and the artists. This has an effect already, and the scenes are currently strongly enriched by a wider spectrum of bodies and minds. There is then also the aspect that the Italian system tends to increasingly build cooperation activities and synergies between the various institutions and alliances between artists with disabilities, dance organizations, in order to have practical projects and actions. So I witness a good change. It is a positive change, and yet it is not that everything is rosy and nice. So the changes that I have mentioned are just the start. There's still a long way to go for the performing arts system to be able to really become a place where people with disabilities can find their rightest place. There are still many barriers, and there are still so many questions that we should raise and ask, and equally there are so many actions to take. So we really need to constantly commit so that people with disability can feel really the desire to participate, so that in the country they see opportunities, and opportunities that also respect their dignity while being stimulating for them. So thank you so much, and I give back the floor to.
Fantastic, thank you. Brilliant to hear that the taboos are going, that the opportunities are starting, but also that radical change is still needed. We're not there yet. It's still part of that journey. So we've heard about Italy and where things are at the moment. We're going to whiz now across the water to the UK, and I'm going to introduce Jo, who is going to take us through a bit of the UK perspective. So Jo is Senior Manager for Dance and Touring at Arts Council England. And prior to joining the Arts Council, Jo was Executive Director at the Gate Theatre, Notting Hill, and also Canduco. So he's very well versed in all things disability dance. Canduco, of course, is an internationally renowned company of disabled and non-disabled dancers. Over to Jo to hear a bit about the English perspective.
Thanks, Jo. So as Jo said, I'm Jo. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a white woman in my early 40s with dyed, sadly, reddish hair, which comes down to my shoulders. I'm wearing a grey roll neck jumper, glasses and red lipstick. I'm sitting in my spare room, and behind me are some theatre posters to try and seem quite arty. As Jo said, I'm Senior Manager Dance and Touring at Arts Council England, where as part of my role, I take a national overview of the Arts Council's investment in dance, working alongside our Director of Dance, Kate Caniff, and a team of relationship managers and senior relationship managers who are working with dance artists and organisations across England. And I do come from a dance background, and particularly with Canduco, where today I'll be speaking from the perspective of Arts Council, but I will naturally kind of bring in my knowledge and experience of working with Canduco and the fantastic artists and audiences and relationships that I built when I was there. The other thing I wanted to just say is that everything I'm going to talk about, I'm going to just say is framed by the social model of disability. So when I talk about disabled artists and disabled organisations and the sector and barriers, it's always framed for me by the social model. I recognise I can't possibly cover everything I want to say in 5 minutes either. So I'm going to really focus on an overview of who Arts Council is, particularly for our Italian webinar audience members, and then a little bit about what it does and what that looks like in terms of the work and companies that we fund, but specifically through that disabled dance lens. So Arts Council England is England's national development agency for creativity and culture. We are driven by our strategy, Let's Create, which seeks to ensure that everyone's creativity is valued and given the chance to flourish in a country where everyone has access to a range of high quality cultural experiences. So through that, we support artists and art form developments and work in place across all of England. So all regions from cities to villages, urban areas to rural places. We're a public funder, which means that we distribute funds from government and from the National Lottery. And there are three main ways that we support dance artists and companies. The first is through what we call our national portfolio, which is where we offer regular funding over 3 years. We've just started our new funding period from 2023 to 2026. And this supports around 985 organisations in total, 74 of which are dance, across that regular funding period. We also distribute National Lottery project grants, which is our open access fund, and that's open to organisations and individuals, and includes key strands around touring and also area-led funding streams where area offices are managing funds for their particular region. And then finally, for a more specific artist approach, we have Developing Your Creative Practice, which is a fund open to independent creative and cultural practitioners to support them to take time to focus on creative or cultural development. So that's us in a nutshell. And through these strands, the Arts Council has been able to support a sector in England that has a strong history of developing inclusive dance companies and companies whose work has a disability focus, be that with audiences, participants and artists. So organisations such as Stopgap, Canduco, who have really led the way in working with disabled and non-disabled dancers and performing work across the UK and internationally. So Canduco, Stopgap, they're what we would call national portfolio organisations. They have had regular support from Arts Council over the years and have been kind of key change makers and set the scene for sector development as we see it. And during my time at Canduco, there were some kind of really key moments around disabled representation coming through in dance and through sort of other art forms and media. So Canduco was the first contemporary dance company to appear on Strictly Come Dancing. And we also developed a co-production with the Royal Opera House. So big high profile opportunities, which was fantastic in terms of increasing representation. But I think picking up on something Aristide said, when we were making that work, we really came up against quite regularly ongoing barriers within the sector, which makes it really hard to make truly accessible work. And so whilst there's this fantastically strong history and growth of artists and organisations, we are still aware of and facing those barriers and challenges to making accessible work. Alongside performance programmes, companies like Stopgap, Coralie, Tin Arts, they also have their extensive learning programmes, which is sort of supported as a key part of the work that they're doing. So those are disabled young people and disabled artists at various stages of their career. And I'd say that programmes like this are vital, as when it comes to training, again, there's a real lack of accessible provision. So many artists cite the importance of these opportunities coming through organisations like Stopgap, like Canduco, but I won't stray into that because I'm quite sure Laura will have really important and interesting things to say there. But I think, so alongside the organisations that the Arts Council funds, I think it's also really, and the barriers that are still there, I wanted to just flag where there are some examples of really great opportunities emerging through other sort of mainstream, for want of a better word, organisations. So something like the National Youth Dance Company, where they've just received Arts Council funding to support and develop young disabled dancers. And you can see the importance and the impact of some of that kind of sustained investment by someone like Maya Leek, who is an alumni member of NYDC and who's now a young associate at Sadler's Wells, so sort of London's leading dance house. And I also want to name check and recognise the support from the wider dance ecology, where there are agencies like Southeast Dance or Dance for supporting the development of artists as well. It's important to recognise that. I mentioned the latest round of NPO funding, and so I'm kind of focusing on NPOs at the moment, but I'll move on to other areas. So in our recent portfolio announcements, the 74 dance companies are involved in that, of which 12 are now disability focused or inclusive dance companies, and 7 of those are new to the portfolio. So there's still really significant development happening, and it's fantastic, but we are still on a journey. But I think it's really important to see the sort of journey that's happening. So one of the new organisations is an organisation called Secondhand Dance, and they've previously been awarded project support through National Lottery to develop their organisation, develop their practice, and their artistic director, Rosie Hefford, was also awarded support through developing your creative practice. Put my teeth in. So just seeing sort of how that flow of support and the longevity that's needed to kind of really support organisations and artists to sort of break in and be part of the sector, and that's something that we're really focused on in terms of that art form development. Another really nice example of project funding is Propel Dance, who have come through the National Lottery project grants in 2022, and they have set up the UK's first professional all wheelchair user dance company. So that feels really significant, but that was funded in 2022, and they are just touring their version of the Snow Queen. So again, lots of really exciting stuff happening. And the other, but before I sort of move on, I think the other things I wanted to talk about were just beyond dance, where Arts Council is supporting disabled artists and disabled-led initiatives across the piece through theatre, festivals, and beyond, and how that then has impacted the sector and the context for the organisations and the artists that I've talked about to be able to develop. So I'm going to name check Unlimited, which offers a commissioning strand to disabled artists, and there's disabled dance artists coming through there. There's something called Ramps on the Moon, whose work champions the representation of disabled theatre artists and actors on and off stage, and where they work through a consortium of venue partners, regional venue partners, to tour work, and actually embed agents for change in their venues to look at organisational practice. So a really important funded piece of funding that was developing that strategic project. And then something like the Horizon Showcase that the Arts Council has presented, which is a showcase up in Edinburgh, but where we've been able to offer profile and opportunities for artists such as Dan Dorr to present their work in front of festival audiences, but also international promoters. So again, sort of raising profile and creating opportunities for artists beyond the UK as well. But as I said,
literally 30 seconds more, Jo, that's all.
Oh, no worries. But the work continues was the next sort of piece, but where we want to continue seeing the work of supporting the work of disabled artists, disabled-led companies, and looking at that in terms of disabled leadership in organisations, disabled staff in organisations, increasing opportunities for disabled choreographers, and how we don't want that to be in silo. We want to be shifting the dial within sort of, again, I hate to use the word mainstream, but I'm going to do it for shorthand and time, where we want to see artists like Musa Mother, who is currently dancing with Ron Bear, or Northern Ballet hosting an inclusive strand in their engagement work, to really expand that beyond the disabled-led sector and actually out into the wider dance sector and beyond. So this project, Open Dialogo, is a kind of key part of that. And as I said, sort of both a dance area of focus and part of Arts Council's Equality Action Plan is absolutely about seeing and supporting disabled artists to thrive, and disabled audiences to see themselves represented on stage. Thanks, Jo, and sorry for the longevity.
No problem. Really interesting to hear. Whilst the journey may have been a longer one, it's certainly not over. There's still barriers, there's still things to change. And in the same way as we were hearing in Italy, there's still that cultural sector shift that needs to happen before we get to a true position of equality. I'm going to invite Laura on now. Laura Jones is the co-artistic director of Stopgap Dance Company, an experienced dancer, choreographer and teacher with a passion for empowering future generations of diverse dancers. So Laura, tell us, what's your lived experience as a dance artist within the UK, and how does that map onto the history that Jo's just explained?
Absolutely. So to introduce myself, thank you, Jo. So I'm Laura Jones. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a white female with freckles, brown wavy hair, and I am, as almost always, wearing purple. And I'm sat in my wheelchair in my lounge that has beige wallpaper and some big silvery teal stars behind, flowers behind me. So I've been working for Stopgap for over 20 years, and I started with Stopgap fresh out of college as a dancer and workshop leader, becoming a senior dance artist, head of talent development, and now my role as co-artistic director has a focus on creative learning, talent development, teacher training and advocacy. And yeah, I think it's really important to talk about the route into, because I think that frames this conversation very well. So how aspiring disabled dancers might reach the profession and the barriers that they might face and lack of opportunities really shows why the specific investment in their development as professionals continues to be needed. So for me, my dance journey started at the age of 5, before I was injured. So I was able to access, quotes, mainstream dance and develop a passion for dance as a non-disabled child. However, when I had my injury at 16, I paused my training, but I was lucky, very lucky, that my college tutors supported me to returning to dance with openness and a willingness to learn. But the lack of provision in training and training on inclusive practice in the education system meant that I could not develop the same dance training to the same level as my non-disabled peers. And I think that's kind of true across a lot of opportunities, that the majority of dance training is for disabled artists to try to assimilate or be like non-disabled artists and to fit their disabled selves into a non-disabled way of dancing and aesthetic. And so we talk about this as the ableist lens of dance technique. And it often assumes that a disabled dancer will just find their way through or adapt to fit into a non-disabled way of learning and working. So yeah, this lack of opportunity and investment has big implications on people coming into the profession. And that's before we even get to all the other barriers like physical and organisational barriers, financial implications, and negative assumptions and attitudes. So for me, a real key part of my development and the success and longevity of my career has been the security that I have had as a full-time contracted dancer with a company like Stopgap. So when I joined, I'd only been in my disabled dancing body for 3 years, so I had a lot to learn. I'm still discovering my own dance technique. At the time, Stopgap was quite small, 4 dancers, and it was finding its own practice and way. But the support and long-term investment that Arts Council England gave to Stopgap, initially with, as Jo was talking about, project grants, and then also the regular funding, core funding, it's meant that with that investment, Stopgap has in turn been able to invest in disabled dancers like myself, like Chris Pavia and Hannah Sampson, Nadampon. They're all being invested in their journey through Stopgap with, for example, regular company class, time to investigate, practice and develop our skills and artistic voice. And even though my journey has been 20 years, a lot of the same barriers still exist, and a lot of disabled dancers find that they are having to learn on the job or as an individual within an organisation that is not maybe specifically designed for them. But not every disabled dancer will have or want the opportunity to develop their practice within a company. So it's really important that, as Jo was explaining, the Arts Council also has this strategy, which includes investing in disabled individuals to develop their creative talent, and that they can apply for funding to an organisation that has an open mind and sees potential. And that's really essential. Of course, it doesn't make up for the lack of provision for, ongoing, but the provision is slowly improving. And I wanted to finish by saying that it is a right, of course, it's a right for disabled people to be able to access professional training and professional opportunities, but alongside equal access in, again, quotes, mainstream opportunities, an approach that is directed specifically towards disabled people is needed to support addressing the historic imbalance that disabled people have faced. But alongside that, I also believe that the considerations and richness that disabled people bring to dance is valuable sector-wide and not just be confined to bespoke and specialist opportunities.
Fantastic, thank you. And again, that whole narrative of however we think we're overcoming the barriers, actually many of those barriers appear very, very persistent. And even in a 20-year span, they're still there. Some of them are still there. We're not necessarily addressing them all. Now, because we started late and because there's so much tech in an event like this, and because our speakers have been wonderful and fed us with so much narrative, it means we've only got 6 minutes before we finish. So we've literally got time to address just one or two things. So I'm going to move straight to the question that's come in from the floor, because I think it's really important that we have a dialogue with people who are here. And it's a question about whether there's mixed ability dance performances in Italy. So I'm really interested in that notion of whether it's disabled people as a group on their own creating work, whether it's a group that includes disabled and non-disabled dancers. And I'm particularly keen about ownership and control. So the choreographers, are they disabled people? The artistic directors, are they disabled people? Who's in control of that work? So maybe if I can ask all our panelists to appear on screen for the moment, and I'm going to come to kind of all of you in turn. It's a question about Italy, but I'm going to ask you in a very, very brief sentence. It's like, what range of work do you think there is, and where do you think the power sits? So Donatella, first of all, the range of work or where the power sits, a one-sentence answer.
Well, certainly there are examples of integrated companies in Italy. I would say, though, that the real topic that we should address is that of the transition, in a way, from companies and venues and actions for community social inclusion to professionalism and opportunities that are given. And they are not so as widespread yet as they should be. We are starting changing the situation thanks to the contribution coming from a number of artists and also alliances that we have to bring forward, of course.
Fantastic. So a call for that increased professionalization, which will come with that funding. Arisade, over to you. What do you think that balance is?
If I understood correctly what is being asked, I think I can add to what has already been said. the fact that you need to enhance the autonomous potential of people with disabilities and express and develop their artistic voice, as Laura said, which means creating venues, spaces, which can give power and a voice to this knowledge, because it is knowledge and it has a value, and it has already been so fruitful for artists with disabilities in Italy, which is the area I know best. We have a diversified scenario, of course, in Italy. Projects are highly different one from the other. Disabilities are different. Stories are different, of course. That is the general context. And you see, until recently, until a few years ago, there was no attention to professional development. So we had a lack that had to be put remedy to, and it was also a situation that led to very different outcomes. That we have artists with disabilities who are leaders, and we have many others who are not. So it is rare cases of very high success that we can boast so far.
But they're coming, they're starting, they're coming through. Jo, just literally 30 seconds on power and control in the UK disability dance sector. Go.
It's a dial that needs to shift, and an increasing disabled leadership and looking at opportunities for disabled choreographers to be making work on companies at scale. It's a dial that needs to shift. We need to see that improvement, and that's my 30 seconds and my view.
Fantastic. And Laura, you're a prime example of this. By moving through from being a dancer to being the co-artistic director, you're actually this in practice. But what's your perspective?
Yeah, I think very much same, echoing the thoughts that it's one of these that it needs to shift and it needs to gain momentum. And I hope that it will snowball, and the more it gains momentum, it will increase. But it's really important that opportunities and representation happens throughout all areas, from training, early years, right the way up to leadership, and giving that extra support to adjust the balance.
Fantastic. And that is all we have time for. We've literally got a minute before we finish. I'm really sorry if we didn't get round to answering your question. There are other seminars, so that hopefully we'll get a bit better at the tech, so we'll be able to have more time for questions in the other ones. If you want to reach out to any of the panel, please contact Stopgap. They'll be able to link you up with any of the panel via their website. And please come along to the whole series of these events. But thank you ever so much for attending tonight. And yeah, have a good evening. Bye from all of us.